We have a very interesting session coming up next. All right, leading in the VUCA world. The world has always been complicated, but the new world is becoming increasingly more complex. Future leaders of any organization, including the HR fraternity, will have to deal with all kinds of changes, and not just incremental ones. And while institutional training builds the foundation blocks, leaders of the VUCA world will have to implement doctrinal changes in the way they learn and lead and influence most on the daily basis. And each of these aspects will have to be the onus of the leaders themselves. This chat will actually focus on developing future-ready leaders who are capable of leading without authority and in extreme ambiguity. We have with us a very, very unique leader. This man has over a span of 25 years, he served for 11 years as an officer in the Indian Armed Forces, followed by another 11 years in the corporate sector, before joining the government as the CEO of the National Intelligence Grid. He's been part of the Indian Army, he's fought terrorists at the Siachen Glacier, he has served as a UN peacekeeper, he has been an instructor and teaching leadership and strategy to officers at the prestigious School of Armored Warfare, and now he's worked at Mahindra Group, and now he's the group president of Reliance Industries. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and please welcome Captain Raghu Raman. Raghu, if you could join us on stage. Wow. And I've been running the Do You Know series, and I asked Raghu, please, can you just tell us something that maybe nobody knows about you? And he mentioned that if I had to tell you, I have to kill you. So I want to stay alive, and the stage is all yours. Captain, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks a ton. So she's just pulling your leg, actually. I didn't tell her that. So I know you're looking forward to Cirque du Soleil. Instead, you got a Joker. So hopefully a fair trade-off. So I'm going to talk to you about this topic about leading in the VUCA world. And as was pointed out in my bio, I had a fairly, sort of checkered career. I spent about 10, 12 years in the armed forces, another 10, 12 years in the corporate world, and about 5 years as a bureaucrat. As a matter of fact, one of my former bosses should be here if he was attending. Mr. Chandrasekhar was then Secretary IT. And a lot of my friends have asked me which one of these three careers was the most difficult one. I don't have the answer to that one, but I can tell you the army was the easiest one. Because in the army, you knew at least which side your enemy is. In the remaining two careers, it's kind of difficult to make out. Ki dushman kahan hai? Where is the enemy? But I found that the principles of leadership, whether it was in an autocratic style, as in the army, or a incentive-driven, materialistic-driven, ESOPs and those kind of tools, and or whether it was a consensus-driven environment, like in the bureaucracy, where to take any decision you need a committee consensus. You want to take a leak, uske liye committee baithega, they'll decide. Abhi to thodi der pehle gaye the, why do you want to go again? So all these things will happen before you can make anything move. I found that some of the principles or some of the paradigms which are changing quite dramatically. And let me begin by sharing a story which happened in the beginning of last year. It actually was in the first week of last year. You'd remember that there was a major terror attack in Pathankot Air Base. And for those of you who don't know what Pathankot Air Base is, it's one of our premier fighter air bases, been involved in every war with Pakistan. And a little time later, about a month later, this news report appeared in the papers, which spoke about how there were gaping holes in the perimeter, in the walls of one of our premier air bases. And this by itself is not very remarkable, because that happens quite a lot in India. We know it's a fairly common occurrence that high security establishments sometimes have breaches. Parliament has been attacked. But what I found funny was another news report which came out 1 month later, which said that the Ministry of Defense had to return 37,000 crores of unspent funds back to the government. So on one hand, a premier airbase does not have basic security around it. On the other hand, 37,000 crores is returned back, so you can't say there was money for it. You can't say, and building a wall doesn't require ITAR technology and patent and IP and all of that. So very clearly there are resources available, but a gap is left. And again, this is very, very common. It happens. Last year, for example, I think India wasted something like 40,000 metric tons of food grain because the Food Corporation of India did not have enough storage space. But last year, the Shipping Corporation of India had about 200,000 containers that were not seaworthy, but perfectly capable of storing grain, because grain is stored in containers when it's being shipped around the world. And yet, there is grain there is space here, but they don't marry up. Now, you could say that this is a very uniquely Indian trait, but that's not true either. Most of you will recognize this building. It is the Pentagon, and this is the sort of headquarters which controls one of the largest defense budget of the world, by estimate somewhere around $700 to $800 billion, and that's more than the next 25 countries' defense budget put together. Despite having this much of resource, the country was not able to prevent the Chinese from stealing plans of their fighter aircrafts, their nuclear reactors, their movie content, IPR. They were not able to prevent the ISIS from leveraging Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all three of which are not just US companies, but they're also signatories to the PRISM program. Most of you will know what the program is. And they were not able to prevent the largest known leakage in the history of espionage in the form of Edward Snowden, who upon investigation turned out was a contractor whose background check was not done. So very clearly, there's the same country which asks you to do the background check of every employee. So very clearly, there is something going on here. And by the way, this is again, not just the government. We see that in corporates as well. A project that you estimate to take 6 months' time always finishes well into 18 months. And somebody actually spoke about just recruitment. Takes a couple of quarters to recruit a person. A project that you estimate that would cost 10 crores to complete actually gets completed in 28 crores. And yet, the next project that you plan, you still estimate 6 months and you still estimate 10 crores again and again and again. So doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result is called what? What is that definition of? Insanity. So one of the things that could be happening is that the ecosystem is changing and we are not getting aware of the paradigm shifts. We are thinking that we are in the same paradigm and we are trying incremental changes. We're saying we'll work harder this quarter, we'll do things more, and somehow things will change. What I'm trying to, attempting to propose to you is actually perhaps we are in a doctrinal shift. We are in a paradigm shift, and let me show that to you with a few examples as to perhaps the very paradigm on which we are basing our strategies, our tools, are now obsolete. And many of these things that we are seeing are manifestation of a paradigm shift and not necessarily because we are lazy or we are not working hard enough. The paradigm shift is taking place in my mind between a complicated world and a complex world. And as was spoken earlier, the world has always been complicated. But I compare a complicated world to a metaphor of chess. And those of you who play chess know that it's a very complicated game. At the very opening moves, you could have a few hundred possibilities to open the moves. 4 moves into the game, the possibilities goes into several thousands. 16 moves into the game, it goes into billions. And 20 moves into the game, you're probably playing a game that has never ever been played before. Now, despite that complicated nature, an elephant can move only in a certain direction, a knight can only move in a certain way, I have to play, then you have to play. So by and large, a better skilled player will beat a less skilled player over a period of time. And we know this world. We know this world. This is the world where we were brought up in, which said that if you've got a certain product that is suddenly selling in the market more and you were in the manufacturing industry, you could quickly move into that product line and increase order and overtime, increase your working shifts. If there's certain skill in IT that was very common during a particular time, a particular skill, Java, whatever, HTML, Python, whatever was the latest skill, if that came up, you could quickly change your existing programmers, train them, and leverage that opportunity, because despite it being a complicated world, you could change some dials and some levers and get a result which was largely predictable. And these are the tools which helped us do that. And actually, The father of reductionism or the assembly line, which we are pretty much all our business and industrial revolution has been sort of foundationed on that. He demonstrated this in a very, very simple and a very powerful way. He got 3 people to make a pin. And making a pin is a 3-stage process. You basically take a piece of wire, cut it to a certain length, sharpen one end, hammer the other end, and the pin is ready. So he gave these 3 people a ball of wire each and let them practice as much as they wanted. And after a few months, when they were really skilled at it, they found that every person was able to make a few hundred pins in a day. And that's when he created that very famous reductionism theory. And he said one person will only cut the wire, the next one will sharpen, and third one will hammer the head. And what they found was not an incremental progress or an incremental shift. They found an exponential shift. They found that in an assembly line, instead of a few hundred pins, they could actually make a few thousand pins. And that pretty much, sort of did our entire management theory for us. So you have the planners, the doers, the checkers, the auditors, you have the bell curves, you have quotas, super specialization, core competence. These were the sort of tools which emerged from that world. But now we are in a complex world, and a complex world is a bit like snooker. Ironically, snooker has actually 10 balls less than chess pieces. It has 22 balls. And it must also follow laws of physics. It must follow the law of gravity, Newton's laws. But in snooker, if you got a world-class player to hit a stroke with a certain amount of force, and you asked him to repeat the same stroke with the same amount of force at the same point, and if he missed that by 1 micron, the resultant board is not 1 micron different. The resultant board is completely different. So while you can assess and plan to pot a ball, you have no idea what will happen to the remaining balls and what will be the layout of the board. And the manifestation of that is, in some sense, many examples that we have seen in the past. Unfortunately, in India, as in many other countries, thousands of women get raped every year, every month. And it happens literally on a daily basis by minute. And yet, thousands got raped before Nirbhaya, thousands got raped after her, but that one rape shook the very gates of the presidential palace. It almost toppled the government. Similarly, dissidents burn themselves up, they commit suicide all across the world. Political dissidents do it all the time. But one Tunisian fruit vendor burns himself up, and Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States. So truly, we are living in an age where the flap of a wing of a butterfly will cause a cyclone. It is not a theory anymore. It is happening all the time. And the funny thing is, you cannot predict which one of those fruit vendors burning himself or which one of those incidents firing which employee can actually cause that tsunami to start. There is no way to predict that anymore. We found this same phenomenon in so many other places. So if you remember the Al-Qaeda versus the ISIS, and I want to give this example from the world which I was in some years ago. The way the Al-Qaeda was taken out by the allies was a strategy called 2+7. They said we will take out the top 2 leaders and the 7 next leaders, and that organization pretty much folds itself. But when they tried the same thing in ISIS, they found whoever they targeted was a number 3. And as soon as you targeted the number 3, the person who replaced him would be far more vicious, far more lethal, far more dangerous than the person you liquidated. So in every which way, each culling was actually making that hydra grow stronger and stronger. And there are many such examples which show that in a complex world, the tools of the complicated world will become a disaster. Let me give you an example. A lot of you, I was recently in a conference in Delhi where cybercrime was being talked about very, and rightfully so. Digital security is going to become a nightmare, as most of you would probably appreciate, even as we speak right now. And he spoke about the fact that the conviction rate in cybercrime is less than 1%. So 99% of the people who will commit a cybercrime can be reasonably sure of the statistics that nothing is going to happen to them, because past conviction rate shows just 1% conviction. And they were attempting to make the conviction rate go up. But ironically, the punitive models of the past don't work anymore. How do you deal with a suicide bomber who is coming to kill himself? What do you tell him? That first we'll hang you, then we'll kill you, or we'll kill you and then we'll hang you? The same models, by the way, which happened in the corporate sector, that if you don't do your job well, we will not give you your bonus. If you don't come to office on time, we'll cut half day's pay. If you don't come for a full day, we'll take off the full day's pay. What do you do with employees who say after 3 years of stellar work that we want to go? Why do you want to go? Because. What's wrong here? Nothing. Then why do you want to leave? Because. How do you deal with people like that? Your ESOP, 20 years later, it'll flourish. So very clearly, the tools that we used in the past, they are not working and it is confounding us. Why is this not working? It is not working because we are moving into a different paradigm. Now, I know that all of us like to believe or want to be the descriptor on line number 1. But if we keep our hand to our heart, we know that our similarities are much more towards line number 2. That is a fact. No matter how much of jargon and digital and gyan and cryptography, all this stuff, in ground reality, to get anything moving in a reasonably large corporate today takes a few months, whether it's a recruitment, So in many ways, we have become like this super tanker sailing at sea. And we are sailing towards uncharted waters because the future is uncharted waters. Future is what we don't know. Of course, a lot of us do rowing. You know what rowing is, right? You've seen people rowing? So when people are rowing, which way are they looking? They are looking at the path that they have covered. That's why we had done this. We IPO'd then. We were so much in Sensex. We have done this before. All of that. But that's all in the past. You are heading towards a direction that you have not seen before. And so now many companies, many of us, we are this super tanker which is sailing at sea. And suddenly the lookout spots an iceberg in the front. And he shouts that there is an iceberg in the front and we are going to hit it. But obviously, since we are such a large super tanker and this guy is a junior one, he's just joined us, what does he know about our strength? So even though he's warning us, there's a digital tsunami coming. There is an Amazon which is going to take us out. Barnes & Noble, someone is shouting. Someone is shouting to Hertz that there is an Uber or to a hotel chain. But obviously, the super tanker doesn't know. Send some experienced guy to go and take a look. So that guy goes and takes a look and he realizes, yes, there is this iceberg and it is going to kill us. And he then shouts down the warning and now the debate begins in the committees. Do we turn right or do we turn left? No, because there's an implication. If you turn right, a certain business line will get affected, something will happen to your supply chains and all of that. If you turn left, certain jobs will be lost, certain people in the committees, their stakeholding will get affected. So this right, left debate will continue. And what is happening to the ship all this while? It is heading closer and closer to the iceberg. So finally, the apex, the Mancom, the whatever will take a command decision, and that decision will be a hard turn right. And the ship's nose will miss the iceberg, but the butt will go and hit it. And that will shudder the entire ship. And that will be noticeable to everybody, including the Mancom and the apex. So immediately the managers will scurry, no, sir, it's okay, we'll manage it. So we're handling it, don't worry. It's all okay, we'll find. But the left hold has been breached and water has started coming in. And when water starts coming in, the ship will start listing to the left. And that is also very visible to everybody. It's visible to your investors, it's visible to the employees, it's visible to the analysts. So the first step that the leadership will do is to make the ship even keel. They will put water in the right-hand hold. They'll have to, because you have to first stabilize the ship. Now the moment you do that, the drag of the ship will increase and the speed will slow down. And that is again visible to the entire community. It's visible to the investors, to the analysts. They will see that the speed of this organization is slowing down. So the organization will pump in more oil into the engine to maintain the same speed. And that, in one sentence, ladies and gentlemen, defines the biggest risk of most organizations. We spend more fuel per kilometer of progress than our nimble competitors. And no matter whether we are doing the right direction, right strategy, the very fact that we are burning more fuel per kilometer of progress, very fact that we use more resources, more man hours to make one management decision, to recruit one person, to create one change management, will pretty much seal our fate in comparison to the nimbler organizations. Are you with me so far? So I propose to you that we don't actually need different plans and different... By the way, I must tell you, I have attended many HR summits, and I must also confess that most of the buzzwords that I hear have remained unchanged for the last 1 decade. This line of the HR people should be business partners and line should own HR, if it has to be repeated in every HR summit, then very clearly it is not working. So we are attempting to do the same things again and again, seminar after seminar. It's a sign of the times that perhaps we have to look at a doctrinal shift. And what I am hoping to put out here is again a learning which I got from my previous career. Mr. Chandrasekhar is here now. One of the things that takes out a terror organization. Interestingly, if in a terror organization you wanted to take out, if you took out this person, for example, or this person, or this person, or this person, that outfit is not degraded very much. But if you took out this person, or if you took out this person, or that person, then suddenly the performance of this organization degrades because you have taken out that single point of contact which makes that cluster possible. And you've experienced it. You experienced it because some proposal of yours has got stuck because one person is on leave. And that one person being on leave has stopped that entire, or for example, many of you are now sending invoices and POs will be told GST chal raha hai. So for the next 1 month, don't bother us. So in many ways, you find that this single point of failure is the one that causes a performance of an organization to degrade. Some years ago, I had read a very interesting article. The article was titled, How to Kill Your Husband. Ladies may want to Google it up. It basically said that when your husband wakes up in the morning, make sure he has a cigarette or two, give him hot coffee, make sure he doesn't go for his exercise, give him a lot of bacon, fat. So basically, it went right down to the night and said that in the end of the article, but if you want your husband to live longer, then do the opposite. So what if you had to create an organization which was resilient, which wasn't depending on these silos, which was actually wanted to do it, not just talk about it, but actually want to do it, then you would create an organization like this where everyone is connected to everyone, where leadership is actually happening without authority. People are leading without authority. There are no lines and dotted lines and no ESOPs that you will hold back or bonuses that you will give. And I'll prove that this can actually be done in organizations and you can create a very, very valuable commodity that is essential for organizations of the future, and that is the speed of trust. How can you create the speed of trust within an organization where Department A will request something from Department B and tell them, give this to us, the paperwork will follow. Don't worry about it. You will get the paperwork. That'll happen. But release this for now. And the Department B head has that much of speed of trust to say, yes, release it. I'm taking a risk on my... many times we keep falling back to the SOP and the general rules. Please remember, the general rules were general guidelines. It's the job of the leaders to deviate from the rules. And when we leave that accountability of taking a decision to deviate from the rules on a case-to-case basis, we are actually abdicating our leadership. If you are going to interpret every situation with a general rule, then an Excel sheet or a clown can do that job. It doesn't require a leader. A leader is required to deviate from a guideline because a guideline can only conceive of situations that have happened in the past. They cannot construct a situation that is going to happen in the future. That is what leaders are meant for. These are our organizations right now. You have these boxes of specializations and you have these committees where we have our representatives, and your HR business partner is one of those red boxes somewhere. But this is what the organizations of the future need to look like, where everybody has a fair idea of what is going on and everybody has some degree of empowerment at their levels to be able to make some movement happen towards the right. And here are two thoughts, how to create fluid organizations, and two aspects I want to sort of touch upon. One is developing leadership which is without authority, which does not require authority. And the second is creating team of teams. So it is not just a team, but it is team of teams working together. And let me explain that. Let me begin by sort of reminding us of the evolution of a leader. And I think leadership basically emerged in a very authoritarian style, where you had a leader who relied on his authority, who relied on his seniority, and the armed forces, the government, and many of the private sector companies, also large manufacturing companies, are very reminiscent of this. That if you are older, you are more experienced, if you have run a refinery for 20 years, you're more experienced than an engineer who's run it for 5 years. And obviously, those environments require a high degree of discipline, high degree of SOP. You can't have a young engineer wondering that if I turn this valve and this valve in a refinery, let's see what happens. You can't do that, right? So it required a very, very disciplined approach and an authoritarian leadership, and you proved yourself by rising through the ranks, by acquiring that experience. As IT industry flourished, you had this second format of leadership, which is much more of a coach leadership. The coach leadership job is to get the resources from the neighboring siloed departments to make sure that you are able to get additional talent, additional resources. But this too, in many ways, is now on its way out. The leadership of the future, to my mind, will be a gardener style of leadership. Now, those of you who've gardened or have seen a gardener basically plants the plants. He creates an environment. He knows that every plant will grow at its own pace. The gardener very rarely tells one plant, you see how well that other one is doing, he'll get the promotion, you will not get it, he's got a bigger car, so you work faster. Unlikely. He knows a bamboo will grow at its own speed, vegetable will grow at its own speed, the shape and size will be different. There is no point in trying to compare one against the other. But what he'll do is make sure that every plant gets the adequate nourishment, adequate sunlight, there is adequate space, pests are removed. There are a lot of pests in any garden, including corporate gardens. Those pests are removed, the people who are nuisance value, they are kept away. There is adequate space for each plant to grow. Of course, he will also do grafting. He will take the strength of one plant and the strength of another plant, experiment, and create new products, new teams, new kind of genetics modified. That's the job of a gardener. And that kind of leadership, to my mind, is the leadership that is required in the future. Because that traditional leadership of saying if a product is selling more, I will order a shift and create more of that product is unlikely to work in the future where most of your products are ideas. You can't, I doubt very much whether a leader can tell you if this team does not generate 3 ideas by tomorrow morning, see what I'll do to you. Unlikely that that team will be able to generate those 3 ideas by the next day morning. So in many ways, and I'll be happy to share this slide with you, in many ways, the VUCA leaders will not focus on education anymore. They will focus on skills which are future skills. These are skills like leading without authority. These are skills of creating a shared reality by storytelling. These are skills of scientific persuasion, of behavioral, subliminal ways of leading people. And I'll give you a couple of examples which shows the power of such kind of leadership. If we want to create fluidity and simplicity in the organization, there are some things that we can actually start doing Monday morning. And let me take them one by one. So firstly is to actually invest in creating a speed of trust. Very often the messaging that we send out into the organization is, we want our employees to be empowered. We want them to take decisions. We want them to have ownership over the decisions that we take. And the first decision that he takes, in which is a slight error, he slammed down so hard that this poster which is kept on the wall and what happens inside the organization, they are almost, complete diametric opposite of each other. Does that strike a chord of resonance? Yes or no? Yes, loud or yes? Oh, yes, okay. If HR is saying that, then you can imagine what is happening to the rank and file down below, right? So very clearly, I think we need to understand one very simple thing, and this is an urge that I have of the HR community and leadership community, that when we do these campaigns of change management, of empowerment, and these 3-letter jargons and all of that stuff, please remember that all of these campaigns are landing on the head of that one same guy who also has to do his daily job from 9 to 5. In the middle of all of that, he has to do this change and this and so many other things which I'm sure justify the calendar of the HR throughout the year. The second is to create boundaried conditions of failure. And let me give you a very interesting analogy from the army here. So you must have all heard about the artillery guns, the Bofors guns, right? So the artillery guns are guns which fire around from very long ranges. So the gun will be somewhere way behind, 30-40 kilometers behind, the target will be there. And the forward observation officer will look at the target and he'll say, 1 round fire, he'll give some calculations and say, at this grid reference, 1 round fire. And one gun will fire from the back and that round will come and fall somewhere near the target. Obviously, it's not a direct firing weapon, so it won't be a pinpoint strike. It will fall in the general area. And then the forward observation officer will give corrections up 400, right 400, and he'll bring one round exactly on the target. And after that, he'll say on this bearing, entire battery fire. And 18 guns will start firing on that one line. Now, what they found is that in this entire exercise, there are many different drills that are involved. So these guns have to be primed, they have to be warmed up, you have to load the charge, the teams have to work like a crew, you have to put the bearings, you have to do a lot of calculations, you have to fire the round, and as soon as you fire, you have to move out from that area because the enemy's gun locating batteries are trying to locate where you are and they'll start firing. Now in this entire drill, something that they discovered was that in field firing, when you are taking them for exercise, you did not have to give them 100 live rounds. If you mixed up 70 blank rounds in the 100 live rounds and gave only 30 live and 70 blank, but mixed it up, the result of the training doesn't change at all. Because the entire exercise has to be done, and it's only when they fire they realize whether it's a blank or a live one. So at 1/3 the cost, they would actually obtain 100% of the training. Now, how can we do that in corporates? Why can't we have skip level leaders who are told, I used to do that very often, I'll tell a skip level leader, okay, you're the one going to make this presentation. And he will be palpitating the night before, he'll be preparing, he'll be rehearsing before the mirror, rehearsing before his wife, because he is going to go in front. At the last minute, I'll tell him, it's okay, you can sit down, I'll do this. Now, of course, once in a while, I'd make him do it also. Because only then he will understand, or he or she will understand between the blanks and the live. But what you've just done is you have created a boundaried condition of failure, where even if he fails, the palpitation, he's already going through the process of going out and giving a high-risk presentation. He's being exposed, he's being battle inoculated without actually causing any live risk. Now, there are many such examples and interventions that you can do to create that kind of boundary condition of failure. I'll give you one more example a little while later. Two other skills which I think leaders need in the future is the ability to narrate a story of a shared reality. At the end of the day, can you imagine? I mean, I speak about it very often. When you look at certain leaders, and keep morality aside, let's look at terrorist leaders, for example. Prabhakaran could get Dhanu to blow herself up 9 months later. Not in the heat of the moment, not in that rage, but 9 months later, she comes to Chennai, she settles down over here, and 9 months later, she blows herself up. That is the ability of a leader to create shared reality, and you have a tough time getting employees to report to work on time. For that, you need biometric and, eye reader, palm reader, right? So if we keep morality aside, we realize the power of telling stories, the power of creating a shared reality is far more than these ERPs which will log in what time we came in, what time we went, how much time we spent, looking at net, surfing. That doesn't work. What works is creating that shared reality, and that's a skill that leaders need to have. I want to share 2 projects with you which are very simple and yet have so much of power. Now, most of the IT companies have a lot of housekeeping staff. Yes or no? We also have a lot of security staff. And usually the relationship between security and housekeeping is adversarial. Because the security guy will stand, housekeeping guy will clean to check whether he's not stealing some pen or stationery or whatever. They don't do that. Usually the employees will steal it. But the belief is that somehow housekeeping guys are responsible for it. Now, it's a very adversarial relationship. But what if we did something? What if we created a syllabus of street skills, streetwise? How to give an interview, how to speak 50, 60 words in English, how to be able to create a resume, how to dress for an interview, how to present your story of your education, minor finance, creating a Facebook, understanding various different industries, simple skills, and created a syllabus. Then we went into the organization and asked for volunteers, 2 hours in a month, just 2 hours in a month to volunteer to take that class. And then we arranged those classes during Saturdays and Sundays when your conference rooms are vacant, your office is vacant, idle capacity. The housekeeping people who come to attend that, they are taught by the employees of your organization, and they are taught these street skills. That housekeeping person who earns 7,000 to 8,000 rupees, he's trained enough to be able to go behind a cafe coffee day counter where he'll get 18,000 rupees, or he's trained from there to go and become an Ola entrepreneur, or he is trained to become a waiter, or whatever, whichever way you are improving it. By the way, remember, when you take a person who is earning 8,000 rupees to 16,000 rupees, it is not a 8,000 rupee increase. It's an orbit shift for that person. The person's children will go to a different school. They will have a different trajectory when they'll grow. And what's in it for the employees, by the way? What's in it for the employees? I'm not saying anybody is some good karma. I'm talking hardcore. What's in it for the employees? Your employees are getting a zero-risk audience in which they are practicing their storytelling skills. All these housekeeping guys are in awe of your employee, even if he is stammering, even if he does not know how to present. He is getting his 10,000 hours of experience, and he is not doing that experience. He is not doing that experience in front of a high-risk client, where if he does a goof up, he is likely to lose your account. This is how you can create boundaried conditions of failure, which actually is a win-win-win. Just requires a little bit of imagination. Let me give you another example. Suppose you told your employees that you can decide to choose any course you want to attend in the world, anywhere. And we will not ask you why you need to go and study design in Venice, or why you need to go and study, music in New York. Doesn't matter. Whatever you want to go, you can go and do a course. Only two conditions. One condition is the total value of the course should not be more than 10% of your CTC. Secondly, the course duration should not be more than 2 weeks. When this person attends the course and comes back, he or she is required only to do one thing. He or she has to conduct 3 classes, one class 3 times for an audience of the organization. The audience will vote anonymously. And if you get a 4 or a 5-star rating, that course is paid for by the organization and you can go for another course, and those 2 weeks is considered an investment by the organization. If, on the other hand, you do not get a 4 or 5-star rating, then half the course fee is paid by you, and between the 2 weeks, 1 week is counted as leave. So you put your money where your mouth is. There is skin in the game. Now when this person goes to attend a course, he will firstly select a course which he believes will have relevance to his organization because he wants to get 5 stars. He will take notes in that course because he knows he has to come back and teach. And when he comes and teaches, he will localize those examples so that it resonates with the team which is listening to him. And you have got a 70 to 80% of the gyan that this person got into the organization and radiated it at the cost of just 1%, 10% CTC. Now, if we as leaders cannot trust our employees with 10% of his own CTC, then what are we talking about empowerment and giving that person a canvas to grow and so many other things. Now, there are many such initiatives which do not require massive capex or setting up campuses. These are all sort of opportunities of idle capacity lying within our organization. Just requires imagineering leaders, people who believe that the culture of learning is what is going to make a big difference, people who understand the skills such as behavioral sciences. I want to just take half a minute here to explain that. And those of you who haven't must read this book called Misbehaving. It has been written by, or The Nudge Unit. There are 2 books being written by Richard Thaler, Dr. Richard Thaler, who was part of the David Cameron government. And his basic thrust is that your human behavior can actually be influenced by subliminal changes, and you can get massive effects. So I'll give you a couple of examples. They found, I was actually talking about this in the afternoon, they found that if you put a plastic cap on top of a sleeping pill bottle, which dispenses only 1 pill at a time, then the suicide rate goes down by 25%. Now that's astounding, because you would sort of agree that the decision to take one's own life would probably be the biggest decision a human being takes, maybe second to marriage or something. But that decision can be changed by a piece of plastic. They found that the GP's self-declaration of their income in that form, in which you wrote, this is my income, so and so, so and so, so and so, in the end, you signed off by saying, whatever I've written above is true to the best of my knowledge. If you moved that line from below to top of the form, where it said that whatever I'm going to write is going to be true, they found that the income declaration increased by 30%. That's huge, by just shifting one line. And I'll tell you why physiologically and psychologically that's happening. Whenever you introduce friction into a system, so I've written all my lies and fibbing and now I'll have to go back and change all of that, it's unlikely to happen. But if upfront I am told what you will be writing has to be true, jo kahunga, sach kahunga, that message is given to you upfront, 30% more people declare their incomes. So we have to start looking at sciences like this for us to move to the next level and to address the VUCA world. And I think the final element that leaders require in the VUCA world is a high tolerance for ambiguity. So there are people who demand a lot of clarity before they give a commitment. And I'm reminded of this story of a friend of mine who was a very successful lady, CEO, a very senior person in a MNC. And suddenly one day she went to the church and she had a very strong calling to join the church. And people told her, are you crazy? I mean, you're doing so well. You're tipped to be the next CEO and all of that stuff. You want to help the church, give them money. But the church said, it's not that we need your money. We need your organizational skills. It's not just the money that we need. And she was caught between this and she sought more clarity and she spoke to more people. But she realized the more people she spoke to, the more opinions she got, the more confused she became. And finally, one day she said, you know what, I'm done with seeking clarity. Let me just join the church. And she joined the church. She found, yeah, there were some glitches. But within a few days, she didn't miss her Lexus. She was happy going to work in a cycle. Her parents, her relatives, her friends, they all got around and they all started in support. And that's when she told me this sentence, which I think is a very powerful sentence for the leadership of the future. She said, I kept looking for more and more clarity before giving my commitment. But I discovered that the moment you give your commitment, clarity automatically comes. Now, in a VUCA world, you cannot ask for clarity. That by definition, you're going wrong. You're basically saying what is going to happen, which is the next Nirbhaya going to be. Let's check the last Nirbhaya and compare and do data analytics and find out the correlation between. There is no correlation. In a VUCA world, there is very, very little correlation. This big data, analytics and all of that, the end product of it sometimes is pure snake oil because you can't base those parameters and think this exact situation if we created, the same thing will happen. It doesn't happen. Sometimes something entirely different. It's the same, snooker. Remember the snooker, just because you saw the previous snooker table doesn't mean the next snooker table will have any correlation to that. So in many ways, ask yourself this, are you a kind of a person who wants exactness, cut to cut, estimate the budget accurately, dot all I's and cross all T's? Unlikely that in the VUCA world, such leaders will be happy. They may be efficient, but very unlikely to be happy. Because in a VUCA world, by definition, the phraseology has to be generally in the right direction, nimble. Yes, we can make changes. There are various stages at which we can alter course. That general line of direction is clear, but the route to go over there may be many, many different routes and many, many different ways to do that. That tolerance for ambiguity has to be in place, and that's very difficult in a society of leaders where exactness, knowing the details, fingertips, he has all the details in his fingertips, has always been considered to be a virtue. So like I said, the tools, the skills which were considered to be a virtue at one point of time will actually become a handicap. And many of our educational system paradigms, you remember many of us, and a lot of them will be here in Chennai for sure, were taught to write our exams like this, right? And why I say Chennai is because I studied in a school called DTA, which is an assembly line for doctors and engineers, right? So everyone there is, the super brain and all of that, and they are always, so they have been taught that before your creation, you have to hide your creation, right? And 20 years later, they're told to collaborate. If I need to get this, he doesn't know that he doesn't know. And that is extremely important in a VUCA world, because if in a VUCA world, if you think you know, then you are for sure headed towards an iceberg and you will keep debating right or left, and go down like the Titanic. Thank you very much for your